Worst case scenario, we'll just record it. Oh, there we go.
Mark, you're back.
I'm back. I changed my name.
Hello, everybody. I think we're on now.
It's showing we're live.
But I am looking at the YouTube channel and I don't see all of our faces.
Let's see.
Oh, it
If
made a new
everybody's
one.
watching, I appreciate you being here and
There we
working
go.
with us too. There we go.
Yep, there we are. I was in the one that had the preview. Yes, I see everybody's face. I can leave a comment. Yay. Okay, we're live.
Nice. That's the whole point of this, right? We're kind of, we just want to get together and talk about things. We're not professional studio producers or professional, show TV show hosts or anything like that, but we're want to just meet and talk about mental health today and have a nice group of people today to talk about it. So I just want to be super brief and pretty much say that we're not mental health professionals like psychiatrists, psychologists, and if I encourage people to seek help like that, if it's something that we've all needed it and reached for that at some points, and I think there's a place for that as well. But we're mostly here because we have a lot of experience with mental health and vet medicine and just things that we do on a daily basis to get through tough times, and wanted to share those experiences with you guys. So we have a special guest, Amelia Knight Pinkston from Life Boost. She's mentor and coach and somebody that we're gonna be picking her brain about mental health and some of our usual team from FlareVet. We have Mark Massaro, of course, Dr. Mark, Dr. Christy Cornelius. We have Dr. Bilton Creedy, and then Greg Bishop joined recently, and Chris Tremblay is here supporting our stream as well. So I just want to get to it and just kind of start talking about things that tend to be the top 5 things that stress us out or create problems in our field in terms of mental health. And I wanted to start with Mark. I know Mark has a lot to say about this kind of thing, and I just want to hear him out mostly, so.
Yeah, we did our planning call. Does the whole screen have to be my face? Can we have all the faces still? I like to see people's reactions to things.
You like the Brady Bunch?
Yeah, and Greg, I loved your living room was so gorgeous, and then you changed it to a brick wall.
So I want to pretend I'm a stand-up comedian.
Oh, you're a stand-up. Okay.
I'm doing an act where I eat.
And I want to thank Amelia for coming. I really appreciate you coming. But yeah, it was, I guess, one of the things that we can just start with. We set this up so that we would do these calls once a month, and I think we agreed on, at least for now, we're going to plan on doing them on the third Wednesday. And I have the YouTube on the other screen. I'm going to stop this so I don't see my face 2 places. But so the live streams are supposed to be the third Wednesday. So that means the second Wednesday, we get together as a leadership crew and discuss, okay, let's make sure we have our, everything is set up and ready to go. And we dot our I's and cross our T's. And I said on the call, we were talking about what can we do to prepare. And we said, why don't we all write down what our top 5 things are, the most important factors in the mental health crisis in our profession. And I said, yeah, I love that. Because for me, euthanasia doesn't even crack the top 10. And John was like, oh, I totally disagree. I think euthanasia for me is in the top 5. And the reason I brought it up is because it's kind of something that drives me crazy a little bit when I see some of the outward facing resources and awareness programs about veterinary medicine. I see a lot and I hear a lot from the public that, oh, well, vets are depressed because they perform euthanasias. And you hear all the time people say, oh, I wanted to be a vet, but I decided not to because I couldn't perform a euthanasia. And I don't know, at least for me personally, that was never something that contributed to my mental health issues. Now, again, I am very cognizant of the fact that it's different for everyone.
Right. I think that's the bottom line.
It's different for everyone. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of became a really interesting kind of conversation. Like John and I were kind of going back to where I was like, for me, euthanasias were not, I was like, it was more stressful when I would have a client who didn't want to euthanize it than I had to witness in one way or another, at least how it appeared that I was prolonging suffering. I see Greg nodding. Those were much more difficult for me than when clients actually elected to euthanize. And I only practiced for a few years before I transitioned out into more technology role, but I could count on one hand the number of quote unquote healthy animals that I euthanized due to behavioral problems. I had a dog that had bitten multiple people that I had to euthanize. Those are very, very rare and few and far between. The vast majority of euthanasias I was performing were animals that were suffering, and I really did view it as I was relieving suffering. And so those didn't get to me as much as, I'm taking a very long time to answer the question because I just thought it was such an interesting conversation that we had. For me, honestly, I could probably make 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 imposter syndrome. I think that's probably, I would argue, one of the most common things that I hear that people are struggling with. I kind of group imposter syndrome and perfectionism together because if you close your eyes and just picked out a veterinary student at a veterinary school or a veterinarian, I would bet you 9.999 or maybe 10 times out of 10 that person is a perfectionist. The type of people that go to veterinary school that become veterinarians, we all want to do everything right all the time. Greg said this in our leadership call that I snipped out, and we struggle with not being able to get everything right all the time. And we're in a profession where our patients don't tell us where it hurts. We can't order up MRIs. I'm sure any human physician will push back on this, but a lot of times we don't get a diagnosis. We can't bill things through insurance. We're kind of shooting in the dark a lot of times. And that can, especially for me, that was extremely difficult to deal with. The idea that I didn't really know what's going on with this case. I'm kind of just choosing treatments empirically. Maybe they work, maybe they don't work. And then it really coming down to just me and my empirical clinical decision-making is determining how this case is going to go, because maybe I don't have the diagnostics. And so that creeping sense of imposter syndrome, it just kind of got worse and worse and worse. And everybody kept saying, oh, it'll get better, right? You just need to see more cases and you just need more confidence.
Get confident.
And when you're 5 years out, this won't be a problem anymore. What I actually found was as time went on, my imposter syndrome got worse and worse and worse. So I wrote down other things like compassion fatigue, client expectations. I wrote things down about pet insurance, not really being a thing compared to the human field, and us having to have these constant conversations about money can be really draining. Yep. And then the other biggest thing that I want to mention before I turn it over to somebody else is this feeling of being trapped, that we, by and large, when people go to veterinary school, they devote their entire life. This is very commonly, I wanted to be a vet since I was 5 years old type of thing. And so we do all of our extracurriculars, all of our courses we take, everything in our lives is directed towards becoming a veterinarian. And we, a lot of us are in a lot of debt. And so when if and when you get to a point where you are struggling, I think one of the biggest reasons we have as bad a crisis as we do is that you feel trapped. You devoted all of these years and all of this time and all of this money to becoming a veterinarian. Now it's not working for you because you're super stressed because of imposter syndrome or whatever else. And you don't feel qualified or capable of doing anything else. I know I personally felt this way. And so you feel really trapped. And then this is where kind of the trigger warning is, I was watching this non-V movie the other day. I do think the euthanasia part, maybe they were talking about how maybe we have a little bit of a twisted view of euthanasia and death because we do it so much, and then we have access to drugs. And I think that's like a perfect cocktail to end up in a situation where we are now.
It's just not a traditional view.
Maybe not twisted is not the right word,
Yeah.
but we have
it's unique. Euthanasia is a good death, right? Like
exactly
it's a relief of suffering. So we have a different.
But we view it differently than the average person, because I think they were talking about like, why are vets?
We're also good at it.
Well, yeah.
Like when we try to make something dead, we're like we make something dead. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm 100% on my euthanasia so far.
100%.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, like my batting average isn't that good in everything, but man.
And I think when you add all these factors together, it's the perfect storm. It's not just one thing, and like what John was saying, it's different for every person. But
exactly.
Imposter syndrome, perfectionism, that's my number one by far. And then what I think that ends up leading to is this feeling of being trapped and you don't know what to do. And I think that's
interesting.
It's a really difficult thing to deal with.
So I wanted to, that's really interesting. You mentioned imposter syndrome. I wanted to ask Amelia, what kind of things help fight that back, that feeling, what can we do to mentally prepare ourselves for that moment, and maybe tell people out there, this is going to happen. You might feel this way, but here's how we get over that feeling.
Can I interrupt? And
go ahead, Bill.
Introduce herself a little bit and tell us about the work she does and who she works
with.
Of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then please answer that question.
Thank you for inviting me. Can we have the Brady Bunch thing still? I love it. You guys.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Amelia Knight Pinkston. I'm a recovered, burnt out veterinarian, as well as an integrative health and life coach, working on consulting for practices. And so now the work that I do is really all about how can I make it as easy as possible for vets and vet practices to thrive long term. And I'm very interested in getting to the root of what is making our profession unsustainable. And really all of the work that I'm doing is working towards kind of this, what I call the unicorn movement, but really empowering and uplifting and uniting everyone together in working on creating kind of a paradigm shift in the vet profession, where we can all lead by example in really prioritizing our well-being, seeing that as a foundation for sustainable success, and unlearning a lot of the messages that we have been taught lead to success, but that really are not sustainable.
What messages?
So it ties in so perfectly what John and Mark have been talking about. Like, so for what you said, John, regarding like, it's different for everyone, right? And then Mark talking about how we are all dealing with perfectionism and imposter syndrome, right? So I've found that one thing that we do all have in common is a nervous system. And when you start to look at things from a nervous system perspective, it starts to make a lot of sense for everybody. And so we as a profession, I've found have really kind of normalized living in survival mode. And that starts with getting into vet school. So like what Mark was saying, we all do tend to have very high standards of perfectionism. And so we are selecting and rewarding for those traits, which are a sign that we are already in like the flight stress response. The signs of that are that like super high standards, rest feels uncomfortable. You may not feel like you're the type to slow down, or you like at the end of the week, you're exhausted, but then you feel like you have all these other things you need to do. And you know that rest isn't going to even feel good unless you can get it all done. And so then by the end of the weekend, you have spent the whole weekend doing other things. You haven't fully recovered, even though you know in your logical brain you need to. And then you're going into another intense week where you're also having all these thoughts, these imposter syndrome thoughts, right? Of like, I can't be perfect all the time because we can't control everything and life isn't perfect. And so we are just stuck in this flight response, or it could be fight or freeze. And that was designed to help us to survive, but it was never designed to be sustainable, right? And so it's like if we have normalized and oftentimes really tied our success to many of those traits, right? Because we are high achievers, we are good at pushing ourselves, and it does help us to achieve success to a point. But we need to recognize that if we are going to continue and have a really fulfilling career that is sustainable, those things that helped us to get to where we are not going to be the things that help it to be sustainable. And that's where unlearning some of those things, like learning how to prioritize rest, even when it feels uncomfortable, or learning what to do with those thoughts, that inner critic that's making you feel like you don't know what you're doing, or that is so afraid of making a mistake, because to our nervous systems, that feels life-threatening. It's about unlearning those patterns and kind of what hustle culture has really taught us. And in burnout in general, that really is the sign of freeze and shutdown. And so that's what our bodies were designed to do. That we're designed to be spending most of our time in the parasympathetic, like rest and digest, safe and social state. That's where we can connect with others. That's where we can heal and thrive, and we have a strong immune system. Temporarily, we're supposed to go into fight or flight, right? If there's something that's threatening, that's natural. But then we're supposed to return to safety. If that doesn't happen, if you imagine like a gazelle being chased by a lion and say they're caught, then that last ditch resort, because our body is just always trying to keep us safe and to protect us, is to go into freeze or shut down. And that's where we, instead of having this like high energy, high stress, we suddenly have like low energy, low motivation. There's a feeling of hopelessness or depressed. And it's a protective mechanism that our body has. It's this message of like, I have been in a stressful situation for too long, or right now I'm experiencing too much stress than I can process. And so I'm just gonna like shut down a little bit to kind of distance myself from any pain. And so I think as a profession, if we can really,
I'm going to have to excuse myself, not to put to find a point on the stress response, but I think one of my patients is having an allergic reaction, so I'll be right back.
Okay, there you go. There you go, right there. There's an example of our nervous system all day long. That's how we live the day. And I think for me,
it makes so much sense, but we don't think about it this way. Greg was talking about catecholamines on the last call, but it makes so much sense. And it's like, I never thought about it this way.
Paying attention to the nervous system is like, it's so important. I had a client the other day. I really like client communication. That's sort of one of my like real strong interests. And also I think in the top 5 for a lot of people for mental health challenges. I had a terrible client last week who was just like abusive language, all this terrible stuff. And I was like feeling my nervous system firing, like blood pressure spike, heart rate spike, my temperature spike. I had to take off my sweatshirt. I was on the phone. And I was just like, wow, thank goodness I'm aware that this is a normal process and I'm not actually dying right now. And I can remember that I'm just sitting here, I'm just on a phone, I'm talking to a person who's very unlikely to come in and like physically attack me as though he's a bear. So it was like really helpful. And then after it, I was like, that was kind of fun. I kind of like the thrill of like talking to super upset people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that is, again, right, like that can be one of those huge stressors, is those clients that can be challenging or even disrespectful. And I think so many of us also are quite empathetic or also people pleasers. And so that a client being difficult, it can make us go into fight mode too, be reactive. But when we can notice, oh, that person is in the fight response, stress response, and all that tells me, it's like nothing personal. It just means that person's internal experience is that something in their life is feeling overwhelming or stressful or like too much. And so if instead we can just like notice that and then get curious from their perspective, what's doing that can be such a superpower for having effective communicating and finding like what needs to happen to reestablish safety to help them to feel supported.
Yeah, it helps if you think of them as an animal. You're like, you don't get mad at dogs that are fear aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
I can
or
help you.
children. I use children. I think of them as children. Like, I have a little boy right now, and I'm like, okay, these people are not thinking at my level. I'm gonna go try and understand how they feel,
Yeah.
and let me just try and make this a nice outcome for everybody's sake, right? For me, for the patient, for the owner. Let's just see how we just calm this person down and get over the pride, get over the being right, and just tone it down, right?
Be the
I have
grown-
a couple questions from Christy. I can see Christy, but I think she's having some kind of connection issues. And so my job is to monitor the comments. And so I have a couple questions for Amelia. First, thank you, Amelia, for joining us. I think we all so much appreciate that you're here. And I can already tell from listening to you for the first 3 minutes how much knowledge you have about this, which is so awesome that you're joining us. So can you discuss the impacts of 1, past trauma, 2, isolation, and 3, loss of self-identity, thinking that you are a veterinarian first rather than it just being a part of who you are and what we are valued for? Christy, that hits right here. Oh my God. And so that's the question. So past trauma, isolation, and loss of self-identity, how do those incorporate into everything you were talking about?
Yeah, great question. So past trauma, and for trauma, I like to think of it in 2 different ways. Like trauma, really, it can mean anytime our body encounters more stress than it can process in the moment. And so it could be a big T trauma, right? Like the things we think about when we think about trauma. But there can also be little T traumas, right? And that could be just like little stressors that add up. Or if you think about a day in vet med and the roller coaster emotions and how great we all are at compartmentalizing and not like processing any of those emotions, like all of those can count as trauma. And I think it's so important to not compare ourselves to someone else.
It's interesting that so many of the behaviors you're talking about that cause trauma, that Mark and John, that Amelia think about, that have talked about, are things that we are actively encouraged to do in veterinary school, right? Like taking a day off is not an option. Taking time off is not an option. Penn vets, half their graduating class last year signed a letter saying they were working 100-hour weeks,
right?
14 plus hours a day. Now, Penn vet says, "Oh no, it's not that bad." But it's a big deal. Like
it's almost unspoken. It's like it's a culture, right? Like
that's where it all starts.
Letters, right?
We all subscribe to this culture that, like Bill said, no days off.
You have to go through this abuse, not just education, but like institutionalized abuse, or else you're not allowed to be a doctor. And I think that's to me where it started. A lot of this behavior
absolutely
was, I should say, I did my clinical rotations at the University of Illinois, and I think they did a pretty good job of protecting the students. But then you see, I mean, this stuff about the Penn vet students was in the Philly Inquirer. Like, if you're working 100 hours a week, you don't have time for mental health. You don't even have time to walk your dog. Like, you don't have time for any of that stuff. And they say, do it or you don't graduate.
So I
that's where I think a lot of this behavior starts.
Yeah, I actually was a clinic student at Penn. I went to Ross University, but I did clinics at Penn. And I remember some of the students were not people that wanted to deal with horses, doing treatments at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, scared of the animal. Maybe a nurse was around, maybe not, just because they didn't staff it right, and just scary, but it's part of your job. And like Bill said, you get to be a doctor if you go scared and treat the horse at 2 a.m. If not, you're out.
Yeah.
And we're forced and
It says, I got kicked in the face by a foal on my equine rotation, 18 stitches in my lip. I missed 2 days of the ECC the following week, and they failed me.
That's crazy.
What?
That's
bullshit,
crazy.
There you
right?
go.
Like, and there's no advocate, there's no defense, there's nobody to stick up for a person who's like, I'm bleeding from my face.
Yeah.
Like, there are thousands of these stories, and like, what if this
Yeah.
person, God forbid, was like injured worse than that and missed 2
Mhm.
weeks? Would they have failed her out?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
That this is, I don't know. I think this is a major problem, and I think it starts in the schools.
I
Yeah.
completely
I want to
agree.
welcome Suzanne. Thank you for joining. I know,
Another
you know,
mental health advocate
I
in
appreciate
Westwood.
you being here. We wanted to have not just veterinarians, you know, and she brings the perspective of, you know, a lot of the staff. I know she's been in a bunch of different positions, and hopefully, as we go, we might add more people, you know, that are part from that part of it. And you know, just wanted to kind of interrupt it real quick and say hi to her, and you know, just kind of go back to what Bill was saying. You know, I think school is pretty protected, and all the stress and the normalcy of being stressed out and being on sympathetic nervous system mode, it starts there. And the good thing about school is that you expect a good outcome. The school wants a good outcome in the cases. You have all this backup. You have this wall with the clients where they protect you from them. So even in the middle of all that stress and all the working hours, then they go to real life, and there's even more pressure than the school, because I feel like it was kind of, it's crazy what the clinics go through, you know, and all the working hours, and it's terrible, and that leads into normalizing feeling like that. I think, like what Bill said, right?
This kind of
Um,
abuse is something you have to deal with, that you
It's
have to
every
tolerate,
day. Yeah.
right?
correct.
It's normal.
And for me, I think that I landed with awesome mentorship, and I don't know if anybody wants to talk about like how mentorship eliminates the imposter syndrome, or at least helps in the moment, right? It kind of helps with the feeling. If you have a good mentor, a good backup, good support system, I think that really is a big part of the medicine for that feeling, you know. I don't
Well, it
know,
also
Amelia, what do you
reminds
think?
you that you're not
Or
alone,
Suzanne,
right?
go ahead.
It helps to remind you that you're not alone, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's a mentor as a doctor or a technician or a manager or just a friend, right? It helps to remind you that you're not by yourself in this, that you're not the only person that's experiencing this. And if you're having imposter syndrome specifically, right, that you're probably not an imposter, because whatever you're experiencing, you're not the only person that's experiencing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that
Exactly.
mentorship, it's all about it's establishing that safety, right? And having that psychological safety and feeling supported in a scary experience. And going back to vet school just a little bit, I think that's why I was so excited about this concept and this conversation, because these are things that we need to be talking about, right? Because if we can be really naming them and calling it out and really talking about how those things that are happening in vet school aren't sustainable, I think that's how we can create change. And I'm a Penn grad, and it was it was a traumatic experience when I was there. But I do want to say I have been connecting with vet schools. I actually just was chatting with Aaliyah Cummings at Penn last week, and they are working on making changes. She specifically is doing some cool like nervous system work. So
But
I know things have to
are
change.
they
And to add that.
cutting down on the caseload? Are they hiring more technicians? I mean,
Yeah.
they've got, last time I checked, they had 25 or 30 open technician positions available. I think if you're working students 100 hours a week, you take fewer cases. I think, period. I think that's what you do. Like, I don't think that's, and I'm calling out Penn because I have like cited sources, right? Like I can't,
Yeah.
like if this happens elsewhere, and it probably does, this is an art, like this is an open letter, this is an article in the Philly Inquirer, like this is real information rather than anecdotal evidence. I guess it's anecdotal evidence, it's just journalism.
Yeah. And no, I think it is very important to talk about this, because another thing is, I think even that we are talking about things in terms of mental health is another one of the root issues, because it is as if physical health is separate, and they're not, right? Mental and physical health are one thing, and both of those add and contribute to being in survival mode. And if we're normalizing impossible working hours and not getting sleep or food or water.
Well, this is, I think what's worse here is that, like, you're unpaid. Even medical residents, like, for the physicians, have caps. They're capped at 80 hours a week. But there's no defense, right? Like, you can't. There's absolutely no defense. Do this or you fail out. And this is a population that's vulnerable. It's totally at the mercy of, interns and residents and admins who may or may not have any leadership, management, or, HR training beyond, like, sign here when they sign up. This is a bad environment, and we've crafted it this way, and we lean into this. And it's bad. Like, it's that's where it's got to start, and that's where it's got to stop.
I want to bounce off what you're saying, Bill. I cannot. So I did work crazy hours in vet school, but what comes to mind, and somebody mentioned this in the comments, what comes to mind is my internship. And I think, that's a whole other discussion. But I love what you're saying about, I've seen things from human medicine that they cap it at a certain number of hours. And I think that's certainly be part of the solution. Or like you were talking about the caseload. I had a very, very unique experience on my internship, and that my internship was in 2020. I don't know if anybody remembers 2020 was crazy.
Kind of a weird year. Yeah.
It was insane, right? And so, and it was, I think, again, I don't even know. I think there certainly is a place where the administration and the management of these hospitals, of these universities, need to step in. But I also think there's some component of this that's purely just, COVID, purely just our culture, right? And so, and again, I think this does relate to the imposter syndrome, the perfectionism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We, as veterinarians, if you bring us your sick dog, more often than not, we're going to see your sick dog, even if we have seen 30 other sick dogs that day and cats, right? Like, we're not good at saying no. We're not good at turning people away. People are very not good at being turned away. They get very upset, right? I personally have had experiences in GP where I've said, I am completely overrun. I'm already double, triple booked. This was like immediately post-COVID. And they get very upset if you tell them to go to an emergency service, and then they have to pay these, now getting increasing in size, these emergency fees, which is a whole other thing we can talk about. But I personally worked 100-hour weeks on my internship. And when we started my internship in 2020, it was 2020 to 2021. We did not turn anybody away. And the longest anybody waited was like maybe an hour or two. By the end of my internship, we were having 12+ hour wait times. We would literally tell people, if you came after like 3 or 4 p.m., we would tell them, come back tomorrow or go somewhere else.
Where did you do your internship?
It doesn't exist anymore. It was called CARES. Now it was bought by Blue Pearl. One of our slogans was all the Blue Pearls. So it was at CARES we care, and we did. That was our culture. Was we cared, and we did every single thing possible. I used to get in trouble all the time because, to Bill's point, we did not have enough nurses. So they would be in the parking lot. I wasn't supposed to do this. I would break the rules. I would go in the parking lot and do the triage, which I wasn't supposed to do. And then I would see the entire case. I would do the full physical, do the history, everything, prescribe the drugs. I would then go, again, another thing I wasn't supposed to do that I got in trouble for, go to Cubex, fill the drugs, write my discharge, send them home. I would see entire cases without another human being involved at all, purely because if I didn't, then they would just build up. We had to buy a second board. We had an ER board that had 17 lines. And we would consistently fill the board. So we bought a second board with another additional 17 lines. And we would have 30 cases waiting. And it would be like, it was like almost like a game that it was like, we had to get things off the board. And we knew that we were kind of just trying to get them in, get them out. You know, my mentor would say to me, to your point about mentors, they're like, Mark, you need to stop talking about the causes of diarrhea and just get them Metro and ID and get them out of here. Like, stop being like the little GP guy that you want to be and stop talking about fiber. Just get them out.
Get them out. Yep.
It was
get the medicine.
crazy.
Get them out.
But that
I think
inherently lowers the quality of medicine because it lowers the compliance. So you're saying, Mark, do a worse job.
I mean,
yes.
But it was survival mode. To Amelia's point at the beginning, we were in survival mode
indefinitely,
all day, every day for a year. It was like, and then that became normal, right? Because you're in survival mode to an extent in veterinary school. I think it, depends on the school, depends on the caseload. But for a lot of veterinary schools, you're in survival mode. And we have, and Suzanne, again, a lot of technicians, I hate that. I hate when I just talk about being a veterinarian. Technicians are in survival mode. Practice managers are in survival mode. CSRs are in survival mode. And to Amelia's point, I think we've all been through it at some point. It becomes normal and it becomes, oh, that just is what it is. That's just what our profession is. And then when it gets worse in COVID or post-COVID or whatever, and then, I don't know, I do think part of this is, we've specifically said we don't want FlareVet to be a client bashing thing, and it's not, but I do think our culture is changing. And I do think expectations are very different now than they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's not a lot of leniency for wait times. There's not a lot of leniency for cost of care. So I don't know. There's so many factors at play, but it's becoming normal.
I want to say this, on as many platforms as possible. The cost of care, everybody loves to talk about veterinary salaries, but I'm a practice owner, right? Like, you want to know what's happened to supplier prices, Patterson, PennVet, MWI? You want to know what's happened to IDEX and Antec prices? They have skyrocketed over the last 4 years. And they have outpaced inflation and veterinary salaries considerably. They have eviscerated the margins.
Yeah.
And I'm done taking responsibility for the cost of care when, a company that made $250 million in the last 3 months of last year raised their prices by 20%.
Right.
Like, get the fuck out of here with that. Like, we're talking about vet salary. Sorry, I cussed.
It's okay.
That's fine.
I was going to try not to.
That's good.
Here we are.
It's okay. We'll take it out.
But this is a thing that's happening, and it's kind of like the cost of vet school. Like, yep, it goes up. Okay, well, people can't really afford to be vets, right? 19% of vet students are graduating with no debt, which means that 20% of them are independently wealthy, right? Like, if you've just got that much money laying around. So, there are other economic factors affecting the profession that aren't just technician and doctor salaries.
Yeah, but that's what people think about. When you bring your dog to the vet,
you're making money.
They look at your car in the parking lot, right? I mean, that's the way the human brain works, right? Maybe Amelia can talk to this a little bit. Like, that's the way that your thinking is. I hand you my money, that money goes into your bank account. They don't think about all the things you have to do as a business owner, Bill, to keep the lights on and pay your staff and pay IDEX and pay. Yeah, I don't know. There's a disconnect.
Well,
there, I guess.
I think going back to how things affect our day to day, like you're saying, Mark, I feel like we shouldn't be having to think about those things too much, right? We want to do medicine. We want to treat our patients. At least from my standpoint, as a veterinarian, I want to go in. I want to figure out what's wrong with that pet, do the right treatment, diagnose it right, have a good success rate, and go home. And I feel like the support system in the clinic, and Suzanne probably has something to say about this.
Yeah,
you need to have, you need to protect that person that, huh?
Suzanne's fighting the good fight at a corporation, no less.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? No, for real, but don't you feel like that, Suzanne, where you need people there that are good at that kind of thing to manage the things that are, because at the end of the day, I like Bill said, he's the owner of the clinic, but do you really want to handle that, Bill, or you want somebody to be there for you to like just kind of prep things for you to have a better conversation than, hey, so and so wants to talk to you, blah 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 blah, right? Like I feel like there should be some kind of like screen there, no?
I like being in charge. I like creating the team and like shaping I like creating the environment that works because I don't, FlareVet's built on people who didn't always fit in vet med, and like I didn't and still don't, but so I created an environment that worked for me. It was a way to stop getting canned. But I like that. But part of my job as the practice owner is like teaching the CSRs how to field those questions and teaching the technicians how to field those questions. And if
your way, right? The way you would.
Well, yeah, and like if something's going wrong in my clinic, like I like having their authority to fix it, because a lot of times as a veterinarian, you have the responsibility to fix something, but not the authority. As a practice owner, it's like, no, the buck stops here. This is cool. Like I get to, if something's broken, it's my fault. It's my responsibility to fix it. I like that because I also have most of the time, the power to fix it.
But you also care about your team, right? So there's also that is that you also care about your team, and you care about their mental health, and you care about how they are working, and you're not going to work them to the ground. So there is also that, right? So and so there's that. So you have to make sure that you have leadership in place. And in some of these cases that I mean, walking into this conversation, you guys were talking about vet school and internships and stuff. I don't have that experience, but I can understand coming into a clinic and having leadership that is in place that is not taking care of the team, because they either so for context, I've only worked in corporate medicine, and in corporate medicine, most of the time it's top down, and most of the time management is just doing what they're told. And so it doesn't always come from a place of caring for your team. Even if the manager does actually care, they're just doing what they are told to do. And not every manager is equipped to do what they're told to do in a caring way, right? They don't necessarily know how to do that. So,
well, yeah, I mean, like we should take the study of, and I was about to say this to Liz Walker in the comments, but we should take the study of leadership and management as seriously as we do the study of medicine and surgery.
Yeah.
Like 100%. We just haven't for decades. And I think like MVP has a leadership team, like as far as corporations go, like the corporation you work for obviously takes it seriously, Suzanne, and they're starting to, and some are doing it well and some are doing it in a performative fashion. But like we need to take leadership and management, and communications, by the way, since I'm on my soapbox, 100%. As seriously as we do all this other stuff, because these are major parts of our job.
Yeah.
And it does not, like if I only had to like spay and neuter all day, like swell, that's what I was trained to do. But I have a whole lot of other things to do.
Right. But John, to your point, you have to take care of your team, right? Like your whole team. Your doctors are part of the team. You all are one piece of the team. And then there's the technicians and the CSRs and the receptionists and the veterinary assistants. We are all a team. Not everything can fall on the doctor. Not everything can fall on the technician. I know I stand on my soapbox about technicians all day long on LinkedIn. Anyone who follows me knows that. But every single individual in that hospital has a role to play, and we're all important in our own way, right? And so
we have to protect each other, really. It's not just,
And one of the ways leaders need to protect their teams, and this is the thing I see in vet med, is that we are not very fair, because we will keep people around who are nasty and miserable and toxic because they can hit a vein, because they know where the anesthesia drugs are kept, right? Because they are good at ordering things. Like we will keep, this doesn't happen in other industries, and I've seen other industries, but like the way it does in vet med, like we honor technical skill almost to the exclusion of other things. And one of my favorite parts about running my clinic, and I imagine Dr. Pinkston, you have this privilege as well as like a relief doctor, is you don't really have to work with anybody you don't like. If I really don't like somebody and they don't that like they don't have to be here. And that's like, boy, talk about protecting your mental health. That's one of the things that protects the team's mental health that we are sissies about in vet med. Like we just don't, fire people as quickly or as emphatically as we should. I think maybe that's like a lot based on my experience in vet med, but I've been around it for 10 or 15 years now. And that's like, that's the way you protect your teams. And if you think you're a fair and honest leader, like if you're not protecting your team that way, you're not doing it.
My number 5 is toxic workplaces in my top 5. I put toxicity because we talk, and I said this earlier, we talk a lot about the abuse we take from clients. We don't, at least publicly, we don't talk a ton about the abuse we take from coworkers and from management and back and forth. And
toxic positivity and vet med, man.
I can't, obviously I'm not going to speak for all clinics. There are clinics, I've worked at clinics with fantastic cultures. I've worked at clinics with not so fantastic cultures. But what you said about we tend to be like very late to actually let go the toxic employee, I certainly have experienced that. And I'm seeing in the comments that other people have experienced that. Amelia's raising her hand.
Well, I just want to add something too.
Yeah.
So I totally agree that a positive culture is so important. I do want to offer that for some of those employees, I think when we're taking that nervous system perspective, like they are in that fight stress response, and that can be a sign that they are something in their own life is just feeling overwhelming, right? Because like happy people who are feeling fulfilled aren't going to be like toxic and disrespectful.
I'm also a big fan of fit, right? Like there's a lot of jobs and a lot of positions at which I would be very bad. I think I'm doing a pretty decent job running my hospital, but like I think just because you didn't fit in here or there or somewhere, like you'll fit in somewhere or build it yourself. Like I think if you're unhappy at work, like find someplace else to work. Right. And I don't mean like you're having a bad day or you had a bad week or it's been hard because stuff at home is tough. I mean, like, I dread going to work in the morning. Like, it's time to update that resume.
I think to that point, some people feel like they've been defeated when they quit, or they feel like, we need to succeed wherever or whatever the circumstances are. Going back to vet school, we have to do whatever it takes to survive. And like you said, there's a point where we just have to look after ourselves, and if we're gonna stay in the field, and I think the goal is to create a sustainable field where people can thrive. I think we do that through purpose, and team purpose, and going in together, and trying to find fulfillment in our field. And I think that's what we always wanted from we wanted to be whatever we are, right? Well, whether it be a nurse or a manager or a doctor, we need to feel like we're fulfilled in life, including our jobs, and that might create a more sustainable environment. So like what Bill said, you need to feel like you're worth something and that you're happy to go to that place and contribute, right? So
quitting isn't failure, isn't defeat. Like if you've got a bad hand, fold. If it keeps you in the game, like there's always another hand.
Yeah. And and I wanted to ask Mark about something, because I think it's a big part of like this, what we're talking about right now, where there's things that are better out there that you might not even think about, that you're forcing yourself to fit in this square, and suddenly you're like, man, I'm so good at this. I never imagined. And if I never took that plunge and left that bad environment and try to find a way out, I would have never discovered this part of me. And Mark, can you tell us like your experience, like, how you came out of a clinical environment to a non-clinical environment, and like, how you felt like when you were about to do it, and then after, and then
terrified,
like whatever years later now.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what Amelia said at the beginning hit home for me. and I never thought about it that way, that I was in a constant, I didn't go back and forth between my parasympathetic and my sympathetic. I was in a sympathetic nervous system cycle, a fight or flight nervous system cycle all day, every day. And it honestly wasn't, I never would have left if my body, and this is also something Amelia said, that I hear is that mental health and physical health are not two different things. It's just your health. If my body didn't tell me, Mark, like, we're done, I never would have stopped. You know, I was so entrenched in veterinary medicine. I grew up in veterinary medicine. My parents are vets. My brother is a vet. My family owns a practice, like Bill owns a practice. And my body literally said, like, Mark, we're done. I was vomiting 15 times a day from stress. Like, I joke all the time that I was like an IBD cat. Like, oh, does he have IBD? Does he have lymphoma? I actually got scoped at one point because I ulcerated my esophagus so badly and my oropharynx from vomiting 15 times a day. It was a pretty insane time in my life. So, but still, even despite that, I vomited every day, 10 to 15 times a day for 3 weeks straight before I told anyone. I was trying to keep it a secret. I was so desperate
just forcing
to cling
yourself
on. I was so desperate to cling on to this dream of being a veterinarian and taking over my family's practice. But when I did eventually say, I'm done, like I was like a shell of a human. like speaking to like what Amelia was saying, my mental health was in the garbage. It was terrible. But still, for me to even conceptualize, and this goes to Christy Cornelius's point about loss of identity, to even think about being something else or doing something else, I certainly never, ever in my life viewed myself as a person who is just part of who I am as a veterinarian. That is what my entire identity was if you ask anybody growing up, oh, that's that guy who wants to go to vet school and take over his family practice. That was my entire identity. And so the idea that I'm going to do something else now was terrifying. And this is why I know, Jonathan, you pointed this to me, because I really am trying to put myself out there now as like, if other people are going through what I went through a few years ago, I want to provide myself as a resource. But to your point, finding something else that I was good at and that actually I could do as a career, it was extremely difficult. I've had a lot of jobs and it's difficult. And this is something else I'll speak to some of Bill's points about our industry and our culture and what we value. I have had more than 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 people tell me, well, you don't generate revenue since you're not practicing. Therefore, I can't justify paying you a salary. I mean, I have had that conversation more times than I would like to admit, but I'm like, yeah, but I have other skills that I can write. So, but eventually I found my fit. Eventually I found what I'm good at, and I can still contribute in my way to my teams and to my professions. My job is kind of similar to Suzanne's in being in the management realm, but it's incredibly fulfilling. And I still feel like
we'd have no managers ever. We would have life coaches.
Right.
We wouldn't have.
But I think that transition from I spent my whole life wanting to be a veterinarian, or I spent 15 years being a technician, the idea that you're going to now do something else is terrifying. But us saying
it's an option, though. It's an option.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an option.
To Amelia last
and it's
week,
okay.
Like, when people reach out to me, my goal is always like, okay, is there something we can do? If you really love being a technician, you love being a veterinarian, is there a way we can keep you on the floor? Is that possible? If the answer is no, okay, well, then we need to figure this out. Like, there are other options out there. It was certainly not as easy as people made it sound when I was in vet school, talking about how versatile the degree was. They made it sound like it was going to be super easy to find something else, and it was really hard. The job market, to one of Bill's points earlier about quitting, the one thing I'll push back on is like the job market right now is kind of insane. I've seen people posting they've applied to dozens or hundreds of jobs and getting ghosted, and it's really, the job market right now is a very crazy place. But
I think
just to know that there are other options and to seek them out aggressively. That's the last point I'll make, is we feel like we're not qualified for anything else, right? And this was my point about being trapped. We spent all these years, all this time, all this money to learn how to do one thing. So when we see a job posting that we're like, ooh, that looks really cool, we skip down to the qualification section and we don't meet those qualifications. And so we give up. That my message is to please don't do that. please still apply,
I-
still interview, still make your case for
Yeah.
why you could be an invaluable member of their team. Go
I
ahead. Bill.
wouldn't get discouraged about the applications thing. Like between Indeed and LinkedIn, like my wife is the chief people officer at a technology company, and I see a lot of resumes come across my desk. But like if you post a job on Indeed, like you might get 500 resumes, and like there is no earthly way to go through them, right? Like there are people who just apply to every job that comes up on Indeed or LinkedIn, and like I think my wife was telling me they posted like a sales job. Got like 1,500 resumes.
That's insane.
There's no way to go through 1,500 resumes, right? Like you have to, and like there's no way to even respond to 1,500 people. And so I think we've gotten so good at like getting the jobs out there that we've completely overwhelmed like the hiring managers. And it's like, I might, I can call 200, let's say I get 500, I can call 200 just because the resumes are terrible. You might look at 100 that are really good. You reach out to those 100, you might get 25 people get back to you. Like, it's a lot of work. So to the people who are like looking for jobs and frustrated and struggling, like keep grinding.
Yeah.
But I also might consider changing your approach and start talking
Networking. I'm big about networking, right?
networking,
Actually reach out to people
humans.
directly, right?
Stop sending resumes to bots and
Yeah.
just, like talk to humans.
There
Right.
really are, I think, endless opportunities. Like if someone's wanting to go into industry, AAIV is a really amazing resource and community. And there are options of going into academics and teaching, or like even within, like if you are doing clinical practice, there are so many different ways of doing it too, right? Like even if you're wanting to do like home mobile services or just euthanasia. And so I think it is really helpful. Like when something's not a fit, agree so much. Don't stay stuck. Like ditch that judgment, get curious about what isn't working, and taking some time to just get clear on like what are your core values, including like with practicing, but also just starting to notice like specifically during a day, are there little things that like bring you joy and give you energy? And like, what are the specific things that feel extra draining? And also observing like at the end of the day, the days when you actually feel fulfilled, what were specific things that happened that contributed versus a day when you end just feeling like irritable or numb in that like fight or freeze and shut down. What were those things? And then getting curious, okay, what needs to change? Is it a mindset shift or new skills, or is it changing environments? The more you can get specific, because our brains love to generalize, and then it's like, oh, I want to change, but now there are no job opportunities. Like that's a horrible place to be. But if you can get specific, there are really endless options.
So for me, good mentorship, good support system, good people, even if it's not in person, like find, and it's a good segue what you were saying at the end. We're coming down to the last few minutes. Do you have resources, Amelia, that for people like that need some kind of resource to help with mental health and things that you can share with us?
I do. Yeah. I work to create a lot of free resources, also have a program. So my website is www.lifeboost.today. I have some race approved courses, including one that's called Beat the Burnout, What We Should Have Learned in Vet School. And it talks more about nervous system regulation, boundaries, imposter syndrome, all of those things. I also have a podcast, Life Boost with Amelia.
I'm attempting to share your website. Let me see if it's working.
Thank you.
I don't know. Is it working? I did share screen.
Okay, and we'll post it for sure. We'll do some kind of post too, so make sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm active on Instagram the most. I'm on LinkedIn a little bit, and yeah, and then I have a 6-month program with group individual support. It's also race approved for 8 hours of CE. Just yesterday, one of the clients posted that she said something like she didn't realize she could be, let me see, just to give people hope. She was like, I really didn't think I could get to such a good place. I forgot what it was like to be happy and having fun at work versus dreading every minute. Also, I feel like my baseline stress is so much lower that when things do start to get hectic, I can deal with it so much better, and I'm able to be fully present outside of work too. Just wanted to say that just to like show people, if you're feeling stuck right now, like it really doesn't have to stay that way.
Cool. Any final thoughts, Dr. Bill, Dr. Mark?
I want us to share the graphic that Suzanne made as well. That has, so obviously Amelia, Life Boost, her website, but Suzanne made a whole graphic of other resources as well. And
that's on the link to the live, but
I have it.
I'd say if you want resources, don't be afraid to look outside vet med. There are a lot of resources in other industries, and there are a lot of, groups and networking opportunities in other industries. I think most people in vet med are generalists at heart. Even specialists are kind of generalists because they have to be specialists for more than one species. So I think look elsewhere, right? Like it doesn't have to be veterinary specific to be useful.
Yeah. And I remember, Bill, you told me one time, I wanted to say this today. It's good to be ready for when things happen. Like train yourself, train your mind. I remember you commenting that one time. And
when it comes
really
to mental health, like don't wait until it's a disaster. Don't wait until waiting to go to the gym until you had a coronary bypass. Like get healthy so that you're ready for the things, right? Like vet med is going to ask you to lift heavy things. Get strong and healthy before that, not after it hurts you for trying.
100%.
Like,
I think that's key.
Health, I think about it like mental fitness. Like get in shape, get your mind in shape and fit now. Before
100%.
You're like before you're on fire and burnt out. Like don't
good to identify those things and identify the things that
not a bad thing ever.
Yep.
And so much of that can be unlearning some of the things that you think are leading to being successful.
Yeah, you're allowed to be healthy and happy and fit, right? Like you don't have to martyr yourself for this job.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and whoever's watching it after we record it, we're gonna have it up on the channel on YouTube, and we're gonna share it all over so you guys can watch the whole thing.
And any follow-up discussion, we can direct into the Patreon. We have like these individual threads in the Patreon. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, for sure. So we're using Patreon just because of the setup. Huh?
The free Patreon.
Yeah, the free Patreon. It's just, for whoever's not familiar, there's an app called Patreon. It's a community-based app. I like the setup for the chats, and that's basically what we're going to be using it for. We're going to have our live sessions there, but also there's a chat session. Like, it's kind of hard to find. It's not super, super easy. It's like a little tab that says chats. You click there, then you can kind of continue this discussion there on the mental health tab, and I'm sure we're gonna keep talking about mental health. So we're gonna meet, and next month, the third Wednesday, we'll meet again and do a live stream. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia.
Thank you.
I'm so happy
of course.
to be here. Thanks.
All right. Bye, guys.
See ya.